and welcome to DNet, the Disability Network. I'm Ing Wong.
And I'm Bill McQueen. Health and fitness clubs have been getting more and more popular across the country. Some of them are very welcoming to people with disabilities, but as we'll see later on in the show, others may need a little or a lot of coaxing.
Also on today's show, reproductive technologies are developing at an ever-increasing rate. Very often, they're being used to determine whether a fetus with a disability should be aborted. The tests offer women more choice, but they raise ethical questions about the value of the lives of people with disabilities. 3 members of the Disabled Women's Network will explore some of their concerns.
And we received many letters about the Latimer case from viewers across the country. We'll hear what they have to say later on the show. First, here is this week's Disability News highlights. MP Sven Robinson may yet face charges in connection with the doctor-assisted suicide of Sue Rodriguez. A special prosecutor has been appointed to consider whether charges should be laid or if British Columbia should order an inquest. Some disturbing allegations have surfaced about the care people with disabilities are receiving at the St. Charles Borromée Hospital in Montreal. The latest claim involves physical and verbal abuse. Heather Hiscox reports.
Claude Messier has muscular dystrophy. For the past 5 years, he's lived here at the St. Charles Borromée Hospital in Montreal. And it was here, in an elevator, he claims he was verbally and physically abused by a security guard.
Il m'a dit, Claude, tu n'es qu'une petite merde. Tu ne vas jamais gagner de moi. D'accord? Et il m'a donné 3 petites claques dans la figure.
Messier is not the first to complain about abuse here. A 24-year-old female patient claims she was raped by a hospital worker last spring. The case goes to court in March. And another hospital worker was fired after MUC police investigated a similar case of sexual assault last summer.
Well, it cannot be safe to tell.
Advocate Hélène Rumac has been working closely with patients at the hospital for the past 2 years. She says there are many other, more subtle forms of abuse that go on at the hospital every day. Marie-Joseph Faresi-Chaussé is the hospital's director general.
Il peut arriver comme n'importe où. On n'est pas parfait. Il peut arriver qu'il y ait une erreur de commise.
And there is more. In 1993, the Canadian Council on Health Services took the unusual step of refusing the hospital's request for accreditation. The council wouldn't comment specifically on this case, but says in general, a hospital is turned down because it does not meet proper standards of care, and there are concerns about the safety of the patients. The hospital has refused to release the council's findings.
On ne veut pas, je dirais même subir de harcèlement de certaines personnes.
And here's an update on the situation in Britain, where people with disabilities have been lobbying to have their rights recognized. The government has just introduced a new bill to address their demands. If passed, this legislation would prohibit employers from discriminating against someone on the grounds of a disability. The bill also includes some measures which should improve access to public transportation and schools. Polly Toynbee of the BBC has the story.
Last May, the fury of protesters at the government's secretive blocking of a civil rights bill for the disabled led to the resignation of Social Security Minister Nicholas Scott amid a hail of abuse from activists, including his own daughter. The government claimed the bill would have cost £17 billion in making public places accessible, a figure vehemently denied by the disabled. Today, the government published its promised alternative, cheaper bill, giving the disabled new statutory rights.
It will be unlawful to discriminate against disabled people in employment, in the provision of goods and facilities and services. People will be required, employers will be required to make reasonable changes to working practices in order to give disabled people an equal chance.
Old employment laws said all large firms should take on 3% of disabled employees, but it was never enforced. Now it's to be replaced with a right of individuals to take discrimination cases to courts and employment tribunals, but there'll be no legal aid for those cases. Already new taxis must be adapted for wheelchairs. Now all new buses will also have similar low-floored access. These buses currently cost 30% more. Campaigners wanted a commission with enforcement powers, like the Commission for Racial Equality. Instead, there'll be a National Disability Council with no such powers. Radical campaigners say it still doesn't go far enough. The total cost to the state and private industry will be some £1.5 billion, but the government hasn't decided yet over what period. They'll decide later whether it should be in 5, 10 or 15 years that all these measures should be implemented. Polly Toynbee, BBC News, Westminster.
For years, Americans who are blind or visually impaired have relied on others when it comes to identifying denominations of paper money. All American bills are green and they're the same size. But a new study could lead to major changes. Starting next year, banknotes in the U.S. are due to undergo a major facelift. That will include different sizes and colors for different bills. Numbers on the bills will also be made larger. That's this week's Disability News Highlights.
When we come back, exercising your rights. If you want to join a fitness club, it's simple, right? You just sign up for a trial membership, decide if you like it, sign a waiver, pay your fees, and pick up your membership card. Easy, right? Wrong. Barbara Hugaveen just wants to get in shape, and like many people, she wanted to join a fitness club to help her become fit. But unlike most potential customers, Hugaveen was turned away. It all started when she visited the club with her daughter Nicole to try out some of the equipment.
So I worked out on the machines for about 45 minutes, about 4 or 5 different machines. And everything seemed to be just great. So the other people in the club seemed to be just fine about it. I had no problems getting around or getting on and off the machines. Well, the 45 minutes were up. We got to the front desk, and that's when Greg McDonald, the manager, came out. And he looked at my daughter, and he said, "She's not allowed to be in here." Well, we were both stunned, and we didn't know exactly what he'd meant. So Nicole looked back at him. In the meantime, I looked back at him also, but he didn't look at me once. So he said to my daughter, he said, well, first off, she said to him, well, what do you mean she's not allowed to be in here? So he said, well, something about an inconvenience. So Nicole had jumped in and said, well, no, there was no inconvenience, and my mother got around the machines fine and up and down the aisles. And he said, no, he says, inconvenience to other people, to the other customers. Well, we just couldn't believe what was said. I mean, we were stunned.
So Hugaveen did the only thing she could do. She lodged a human rights complaint against Family Fitness for allegedly discriminating against her.
Foremost, the machines that we currently offer are not designed to be used safely and effectively, unfortunately, by anyone in a wheelchair.
Gene Kay is co-owner of Family Fitness. He denies Barbara Hugaveen's allegations against the club. He says her disability prevented her from safely using the equipment.
I mean, obviously, we're dealing with a woman here that has severe disability. It was a judgment call on our part. At that time, I think it was the correct judgment. As I look back on it now, a decision had to be made, and that decision was based purely on the issue of whether we could safely and effectively offer her our services.
But Kay says that Hugaveen was never told that she was an inconvenience.
Well, as I understand it, she was taken aside on her way out the facilities she was exiting, and she was told, and again it's my understanding, and I stand behind the gentleman that handled this issue. He's been an employee of this company for a long time, and he's a man that is very well respected and very well liked by staff and members. He politely and professionally told her that we would not be able to accommodate her needs, and it was unfortunate, but as such we would not be able to offer a membership.
My name's Ing Long. What's yours?
My name's Greg.
And this is Greg McDonald. He's the manager who spoke to Barbara Hugaveen and her daughter the night they visited the club. He has a different version of what happened, and this is what he told us in an off-camera interview.
Could I have you stop the camera for 1 second, please?
I said I'd have to make contact with my head office and see what kind of program we could create for you to help you out. And that's when I think it's Nicole took offense to that and said, well, that's typical. And really, other than a couple of other things, again, for her situation, the machines aren't going to help her or benefit her situation. And that was the extent of it. Nothing else was said at that time. But Hugaveen says she was never told that her disability may prevent her from using the equipment.
Publicly, they have said that it is a safety reason. When we were there that evening, safety was never brought up. But now that it's gone on the news and the Spectator, and you know, Now it's become a safety issue. Anybody that goes to the fitness club has to sign a waiver saying that they can't hold the club responsible for anything that happens, so why would it be any different for me? I was willing to sign the waiver. I mean, I wouldn't try to use something that I know I can't use. That would just be foolish, you know, that they're not giving anybody enough credit, and they're not giving me enough credit to know what I can and can't do.
Sherry Hogan is president of New Attitude Fitness Club. She opened her doors to people with disabilities after being approached by 2 disabled women who wanted to join her club. Hogan says while safety is always a concern, it hasn't stopped people with disabilities from using her club.
I don't see a safety issue really, other than the normal ones that go along with any person coming in. If you're in a wheelchair and you do something and it doesn't feel comfortable, then you don't do it. You find out what works for the individual and you cater your program according to that. We've had a lady in the club who was blind. We had another lady who had muscular dystrophy. And we've had all kinds of different, you know, people through here, and it's been great because they can do what their limits allow them to do, and it's the same as any other person.
And the only limitation Barbara Hugavine encountered was the attitude in family fitness.
The facilities for wheelchairs were just great. The showers were nice and big, and the washroom area was big. It was one of the best I've ever seen for wheelchairs.
Despite everything that has happened, Hugavine says she will consider joining Family Fitness if they apologize to her.
I'd hold my head up high and I'd go in because this just shouldn't happen to people.
Barbara Hugavine has since settled with Family Fitness. She is unable to discuss the terms publicly, but did say she'll try to get a membership again in 6 months. In the meantime, she says Family Fitness will be making further modifications to their facilities.
When we come back, new reproductive and genetic technologies, the contradictions of choice.
Until recently, a mother-to-be didn't really know anything about her baby until it was born. Now developments in medical technology have changed that. New reproductive technologies are being used more frequently for prenatal screening. These screenings can indicate certain disabilities, such as Down syndrome. For people with disabilities, the use of this information raises huge moral and ethical questions. The terms wrongful birth and wrongful life have emerged in medical and legal circles to justify the abortion of unborn babies with disabilities. Just what is a wrongful life and what is a rightful life? The Nazis thought they knew the answer to these questions. They used the concept of eugenics to justify the extermination of many people under the guise of creating perfect human beings. Are these new technologies leading us down the same path? A Federal Royal Commission on Reproductive Technologies released a report just over a year ago. Among other conclusions, it said it was wrong to use prenatal screening for gender selection. But although people with disabilities made presentations to the Commission, it didn't reach the same conclusion based on disability. The Disabled Women's Network, or DAWN Canada, met late last year in a national conference in Vancouver. They discussed the implications of the new technologies. Bill spoke with 3 DAWN members who attended the conference. Eileen O'Brien is from Vancouver and chairperson of DAWN Canada. Lorna Renui from Toronto is a graduate student at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. She's researching new reproductive and genetic technologies. And Yvonne Peters in Winnipeg. She's a well-known equality rights lawyer.
I think the reason that people with disabilities should be concerned about what's going on with reproductive technologies is because a very large part of the reproductive technologies has to do with prenatal screening and prenatal diagnosis. And the primary purpose of this screening and testing is to determine disability. And often when disability is determined through these tests, the woman or the parents are persuaded, coerced to end that pregnancy solely because the disability has been detected in the fetus. So that's why we need to be concerned about the technologies. We need to be concerned about the report because essentially the report says very, very little about what the ethics should be in terms of guiding how these prenatal tests are being used in Canadian society.
So there we're right into eugenics, and the idea that became frightening to me, again, when people explained it, that in fact what people want is a kind of a normal that gets determined by those who have power.
Eugenics has been around for a very long time. This is not new. It's simply taking on a new means through these prenatal tests. So I think that's probably, where this all comes from. But I want to make another point because I think it's very important, and that is, it goes to the whole question of choice. And I think all of us on this panel would agree that a woman's reproductive choice is absolutely paramount, and we wouldn't want to tamper with that. But what is problematic, however, is when that choice is being influenced by discriminatory attitudes. If those tests are provided to her and the information is provided to her in a discriminatory way about disability, then the choice she is making is rooted in disability fear and disability discrimination. And that's what's objectionable about these tests, is that they are motivated on prejudicial, biased assumptions about disability.
What should society do to regulate these technologies?
We're looking at, in the Disabled Women's Network of Canada, into the possibility of a moratorium. We have been looking at some of the international women's groups who have actually thought of the idea that perhaps no genetic testing at all for a period of time because it's not safe. We know that as disabled people, they would like to eradicate us. And at this point, every disabled fetus, every fetus that has a marker for genetic disease is at risk.
I think there needs to be a lot more awareness generated, amongst people about the impact these technologies can have on our society and the implications of things like embryo research and genetic testing and screening.
Yep.
Not just for people with disabilities, but across the board.
One thing we haven't really pointed out is that the profit motive in this. We know that people are making a lot of money on this. In terms of you would even know better, either one of you perhaps, what kind of stocks are being bought in this area. But I know that the business of in vitro fertilization and all the patenting of the human genes in eggs for profit is just one of the largest growing businesses internationally. And I want to say also, in some countries it's actually being weighed that as a choice of whether to abort a child, how much it's going to cost to see this disabled child through to adulthood, and how much it will save the social services in terms of aborting within the first 3 months. And we do not want our lives based decision whether to be born and how much it's going to cost the social services. We want a quality of life for people with disabilities.
Any final comment, Yvonne?
Yes, the extent of reproductive technologies is massive. We don't, as a general population, understand how extensive it is. We really must inform ourselves and educate ourselves, because it is opening up a very dangerous door in terms of what kind of life is allowed to be born, and what kind of a life we will endorse. So I think we really need to be aware of what's going on, and to get involved and to actively participate in these technologies, which are going to have a profound influence on all of our lives.
I'd like to thank you all for joining us today on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you who've written to us throughout the season. We've received letters commenting on many of our shows. People from across the country have expressed strongly opposing views on the Latimer case. Here are some of those comments. When we looked at the case, we asked Sam Savona, who has cerebral palsy, to respond to the way that the story was reported. Donalyn Jones of North Battleford, Saskatchewan, wrote to us. This man on your program is able to go into business for himself, but Tracy Latimer would never be able to do this and was in constant pain. It has been said that she could smile and loved animals, but there has to be more to life than that. Someone had to speak for Tracy Latimer because of her physical and mental condition, and who better than her parents, who loved and cared for her for the first 12 years of her life. The way Tracy died was very humane.
Rita Piggott of Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan writes, "I believe there is a big battle ahead of us regarding assisted suicide, a euphemism for murder, and mercy killing, another euphemism for murder."
Karen Kuntz from Wilkie, Saskatchewan writes, "Surely people are smart enough to realize Bob Latimer didn't end his daughter's life because she was disabled. He ended it because she was in terrible pain. I don't think that means that if he were pardoned, all families with a disabled person are going to put them to death."
And this letter is from Addie DeGraff, who lives in Moose Horn, Manitoba. She writes, "All the attention is given to the father. What about the rights of this girl, even if she cannot express it? Who stood up for her?"
There are other children who are in situations similar to the one Tracy found herself in before she was killed. We asked Gloria Christensen to reflect on how Robert Latimer's actions are affecting them. Gloria Christensen's son, Scott, is deaf-blind and has cerebral palsy.
I wonder if Mr. Latimer realizes that in one day in Canada, things changed for every child with a disability. Children went to bed at night thinking they were safe in their homes and loved by their parents, and they woke up the next morning finding out that they could be loved by their parents and murdered by their parents. And we haven't heard the voices of children. I've been talking to families and finding out how children with cerebral palsy and with other challenges are feeling, and I've heard of about a 9-year-old boy who has cerebral palsy. He has had 2 of the surgeries Tracy Latimer has had. He's experienced pain. He also knows pain can be relieved appropriately. And he asked his mother, "Would you kill me because I was feeling pain?" He's really concerned. This whole question is upsetting children across the country.
Latimer's case is scheduled for appeal. People in Equal Participation, a group from Manitoba, is seeking intervenor status. They want his conviction to be upheld. The Council of Canadians with Disabilities is also seeking intervenor status.
Thanks again to those of you who took the time to write to us. We appreciate all your letters, opinions, and story ideas. Our address is coming right up. That's the Disability Network this week. I'm Ming Wong.
And I'm Bill McQueen. Now here's our address. Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W1E6. That's Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W1E6. Or you can fax us at area code 416-205-3399.